welcome back from our break. I'm happy to bring Jason Samuel on for you guys next. In addition to being a solutions architect and a CTP, Jason is also one of our Houston CUGC leaders, and he is a leader of the CUGC networking SIG. So he is very involved with CUGC, and we are so happy to have him talk to us here today. Jason, are you ready for me to send the screen over to you?
Yes, please.
There you go.
Okay, just let me know if you can see my screen there.
Yep, I see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So today I'm going to be talking about native OTP with NetScaler, securing your Citrix environment overnight for free. A little bit about me. I am from Houston, Texas, as Stephanie said. I'm a CTP and ACE, a co-leader of the CUGC networking SIG, co-leader of the Houston CUGC. I'm the author of jasonsamuel.com. I'm also a community contributor on dapcc.com, and I'm also a solutions architect and security practice lead at Alchemy Technology Group. My Twitter handle is right there if you'd like to follow me. And today's key takeaways that I'm going to cover are, first, a little story. I like to correlate things in my professional life with things that I see around me. And there was a recent TV show that I was watching, and I felt like IT security can be seen all over in that TV show. Now, for those of you that watch that TV show, you can follow along. For those that don't worry, I'm not going to have any spoilers or anything there, but I'm still going to correlate it to events in your environment, and that way you can kind of have a little bit of a mind exercise. The other takeaway I have is why multi-factor authentication is important for your Citrix environment and where you can use it. And the last takeaway that you'll have is how does NetScaler OTP work and how do you implement it? So let's start with our story. First off, we've got a NetScaler engineer. You can clearly tell he's a NetScaler engineer because he's wearing a Citrix NetScaler Rocks t-shirt there. Now, he actually works in an IT organization, and in that IT organization, there are different teams represented by these different banners, right? And these different teams have different people and managers and directors and VPs and stuff that all set the goals for those teams, and they all report up to senior leadership, which is a CIO type figure. That CIO has sets the annual budgets. They set the focus of the environment for the whole year and beyond. And basically, all those teams work to deliver on that message. But how those teams get there could be at different priority levels because each team has to set priorities within each other. And of course, they have their budgets as well. Now, outside here is this blue area that we will call the internet, right? And we have users out there that actually want to come in and use our services. This is the mobile workspace. This is nothing new for any of us. This is what we do for a living, right? And in between these two pieces of land, we build a DMZ, right? Which is essentially just a big firewall. And in that firewall, we have to have a way for them to get back in. And of course, if you're listening to me speak, you know what's coming next. It's going to be NetScalers. Now, NetScalers are just a way, using a NetScaler gateway or a unified gateway is a way to expose a very small bit of your infrastructure to the internet on port 443. And it allows people to come in and use SSL ICA proxy, to use CVPN and use their SaaS apps, or even full-blown VPN. It's very limited exposure. It's very hardened. And of course, these NetScalers are there watching day and night, 24/7, 365. And you'll notice that they're wearing these little black capes as well. That shows that there's definitely a relationship between that NetScaler engineer and these devices. You see, there's a brotherhood there. And how you manage that brotherhood, how do you manage the different NetScalers in your environment is using things like NetScaler Mass, or the most recent cloud-based version of NetScaler Mass, which is called NetScaler MA Service. With this, you can look at the health of your environment, you can look at the performance, and you can orchestrate. You can manage the members of your brotherhood. So that's how you become a leader over your NetScaler environment. Additionally, with NetScaler Mass, you have the ability to use things like Security Insight, which allows you to see security events. And so now you're starting to understand why our NetScaler engineer has a little bit of a frown on his face, because he sees things going on out there in the DMZ, people trying to come in through that NetScaler gateway. Now, if you've been watching the news, you keep hearing this one thing over and over again all the time, and that news is that hackers are coming. Now, hackers, like half the US actually just got exposed a few weeks ago. So you know hackers are coming. It's just an eventuality. And what hackers like to do is they don't sit there and port scan your environment looking for vulnerabilities in hardware. I mean, they do that, but it's a little harder to come in through vulnerabilities like that versus targeting the weakest link in your environment. And the weakest link in your environment is actually your end users. They're the most easiest to target. You'll notice this attacker has a spear in his hand. That's because one of the common ways to perform a credential theft is to do what's called spear phishing, where they target high-value users in your in your environment, like C-level executives or IT administrators and so on. And they try and get them, they send them a targeted email, and they try and get them to click on this email and basically install malware. And you know, there's other techniques as well to be able to harvest credentials. So once this attacker has the credentials, you can see that he writes it down on a Post-it note, and that's just further to rub it in the face of IT, because we tell our users, don't write your passwords down on Post-it notes. And so with these credentials, he's now able to mimic a user. He's essentially a zombified user who's using the user's credentials to come in. And we really don't have any way of stopping him if he has the username and the password. Now, our NetScaler engineer here, he wants to do something about this. He wants to do the right thing. So the first thing he does is say, hey, I need a multi-factor authentication solution. Let me go investigate what's out there. And as soon as he starts doing that, all of a sudden, all these awesome MFA solutions providers show up. And there's ones like Azure MFA, Okta MFA, Duo, RSA, Secure ID, SMS Passcode. There's tons of different providers out there. And they're all really, really good. As you can see, they're represented by a gladiator and a ninja. And then sometimes when you start investigating some of these providers, you'll start seeing features that you probably didn't even know existed. And you're like, man, I really want this solution. I want to get it immediately. We should have had this months ago, right? And so you go to the other banners within your organization and you start socializing the idea, hey, we need to protect our NetScalers better. How do we do this? And the first thing you hear from people is that, well, actually, the first thing that you hear from these people out here is that you need to bend the knee, right? And what bending the knee means in this medieval type time frame is that you bend the knee and show respect to a king or queen, right? But you don't really do that to a provider that's coming out on the external side. In the modern days, what bending the knee actually means is paying the invoice, right? And they want you to pay it pretty much immediately. So when you go to these other IT banners within your organization and you start talking to them, the first thing they're going to say is, hey, we don't have the budget for this. We don't have the headcount to deploy this, or we don't have the resources just to even wrap our heads around this, at least not this year. So what do you do here? This is where the NetScaler team kind of started analyzing this situation and saw, wait a minute, this is actually happening to a lot of different people. How can we make the situation better? And what they came up with is, they noticed that a lot of these MFA solutions actually use cell phones, right? Cell phones are something that everybody carries in their pocket. It's something that we can use to help authenticate using a passcode into the NetScaler. So what they said, you know what, let's get to work, and they pulled out their magic wand and they came out with 12.0.51.24. This build onward allows you to be able to do this functionality, to be able to use a passcode on the phone, talk directly to the NetScaler, talking to AD without having to have a third-party MFA solution in place. And they did one more thing. They made it free. So it's the best thing possible. You basically just go out to citrix.com, download the latest NetScaler 12.0 firmware out there, and you deploy it to your NetScalers. And pretty much overnight, your NetScalers transform into a far more solid solution than they already are. You've heard me speak before. They are basically giant Swiss Army knives. Well, now here's another blade in that knife set. So now you have users that are able to get in using their user ID, their password, and of course the one-time password, which is essentially a passcode that they enter into their NetScaler Gateway to get in. But now this guy out there that has stolen credentials of one of your users, and he has it there on the Post-it note, there's no way for him to get into the environment, because there's no way for him to really intercept that passcode from these mobile devices, at least not easily. So key points on Native OTP. It is a form of multi-factor authentication built into NetScaler firmware. starting with 12 Bill 5124 and above. So really July 2017 onward. So it's only been a little over 2 months since this has come out. That's why this is kind of an intro to this solution. It requires no additional servers. It talks straight to AD. It uses nFactor, so you can actually chain additional authentication methods together with any logic that you desire. And then best of all, like I said, it is free on Enterprise and Platinum NetScalers. Now, I don't know about you, but there are some companies out there that actually choose to maybe remove features from things that they have and then turn around and try and monetize it. You may know who I'm talking about. Luckily, the NetScaler team has not decided to do that. They understand that you made an investment in your NetScalers, and this is a feature they could have easily have charged you for an access license or something for, but they decided not to. They said, you know what, this is your investment. We're gonna grow it with these code updates, and we're gonna give you this for free. So breaking down some information security industry terms that you need to understand to have conversations in your environment. 2FA is a common acronym that you hear. 2FA means exactly 2 forms of authentication. It's typically your password, which is something you know, and a hardware token, for example. So way back earlier in my career, we used to have these things called hasp keys that we would have to plug into the back of the servers, and it was a form of license enforcement. The software developer required us to have this USB key essentially just plugged in all the time in order for the application to run. Well, guess what? This is a form of validation. It's a factor. The more common two-factor authentication system that we're all used to is things like a hardware token. Now, this is something that you put on your keychain and it counts down, and these hardware tokens are always just a kind of a nightmare to manage. I was using these much earlier in my career with NetScalers, deploying these solutions. And the worst part about this is especially if you run in a global environment, you try and ship these things off outside of the country, and they get held up by customs, and it could be weeks to months before they get released out of customs. And so you've got these end users that want to get in, and there's really no way, or you have to come up with alternatives. It's just a nightmare to deal with. Additionally, RSA Secure ID was actually compromised back in 2011, and so they had to replace 40 million Secure ID tokens for people. This is very, very expensive. It's time consuming. And then users are just, angry because now you have to, you're interrupting their workflow to try and replace these little plastic things hanging off their keys. So most vendors have now stopped using these hardware tokens. The easier way is to use our smartphones, right? Using these authenticator applications that actually have the ability to, put that little passcode in there and count it down just like that. The other term that you need to understand is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication just means it can be 2 forms or more. Okay, so 2FA is actually a form of MFA because it's 2 forms. It's a password, something you know, phone, something you have, or like a thumb, or even like Windows Hello, you can use your face. There's different ways that you can chain factors together, and you can have an unlimited number of factors. But that's essentially what MFA is, 2 forms or more. Another term, of course, is OTP itself. What does OTP stand for? OTP stands for one-time password. It's a code that is generated and cannot be used in a replay attack. So it's just generated on the fly. It's actually backed by the Initiative for Open Authentication, and their logo is over there to the right. If you see that logo, now you understand what that means. Now, OTP itself actually has 2 different methods. There's the first method, which is HOTP, which is HMAC-based one-time password. This is basically just a code that's generated on the fly, but it doesn't actually count down, and this is RFC 4226. The more common one, and the one that we're talking about here today, is called time-based one-time password, TOTP. It's the same thing. It generates a code on the fly, and it counts down to the expiration, typically around a 30-second countdown, just to account for clock drift on systems. And this is part of the RFC 6238 standard. This is used by pretty much every MFA provider out there. It's actually supported by a number of authenticator systems. I have on the right-hand side, the first picture there is Google Authenticator, which shows a little bit of a pie graph as it counts down. On the right-hand side is Microsoft Authenticator, which actually shows the true number, the number of seconds left as it counts down. And I've used all these solutions with Native OTP, and I'll get more on that later. Now, NetScaler specific terms, when you hear the word Native OTP or the words Native OTP, it's just the OTP I just talked about, but it's built into the NetScaler. That's all that means. Now, nFactor is another word that you'll hear around NetScaler. nFactor is just an infinite number of multi-factor authentication methods. Now, you're going to go and possibly upgrade your NetScalers and then go look on the left-hand side looking for, hey, how do I enable this feature? I don't see this module in here. Well, these are actually concepts, right? They are not modules. If you go hunting for these words, they're not going to be in there. There are multiple modules within the NetScaler that actually compromise these concepts, and I'm going to show you some of that a little bit later. So if you have other MFA methods, you can actually still use them with NetScaler OTP. If you hear any of these names here on the right-hand side in your organization, those are the admins that you'd want to talk to. I didn't display these names in any particular order. They're totally random. I deploy some more than others. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. They're all good solutions, but above all, I've used them all with NetScaler and they work great. The thing is, with nFactor, you have the ability to target groups of users with one or more combinations of MFA. So if, for example, you recognize one of these names in an email as being used by a group of users, you can actually, and that particular admin actually wants to deploy it company-wide but can't because of license or subscription costs, you can actually use NetScaler OTP for the majority of your environment and still use this with a combination of other solutions that you may already have. Now, if you're a decision maker, I want you to know that you should please do your research on any company that you choose to work with. Evaluate all aspects of the company. There are RSA secure items you're going to have to beat up on them a little bit because they're very well known. But 2011 was the big compromise. But then afterwards there were some allegations of backdoors being built in and so on. These are things that you can't really control. But if you have a solution that is built into something that you have that you can kind of see how it all works, that gives you a little bit more insight, a little bit more of a trust feeling there. So just really do your research on anybody you plan to do business with, especially something that you intend to trust to get perimeter access. Now, when I talk to organizations, sometimes I hear people saying, hey, you know what, I don't really need MFA. We force complex passwords. We require passwords to be changed every 60 days. Don't give local admin rights. Foreign IPs are blocked to the firewall. We vault credentials for service accounts. We have intrusion detection and prevention systems. We're going to deploy a SIM to monitor everything, or we're going to build a man to SOC 24/7, and we're going to monitor all this stuff. These are all good security practices, but they're all excuses. There's no reason that MFA shouldn't be the very first thing you do, because security is done in layers, right? So think of an onion, right? It has multiple layers. To get to that center, you really have to cut through all these layers. There's no way around it. And the more layers you have, the thicker that onion is, and the harder it is to cut down into the middle. Now, types of password attacks. Now, our little ice zombie friend here with the password again, he used one technique called spear phishing, but there are actually multiple ways to get passwords from users, and these are conversations that you'd probably want to have in your environment with people that might be able to help you deploy something like this. With all these methods, what attackers like to do is they take these credentials and they drop it out on Pastebin, for example, just to show, hey, you know what, I'm the first hacker to be able to get into that company and dump all these user credentials. Or they do something worse. They actually go out and without anybody knowing, they go and sell it to other organizations or nation states, and they do it for money, or they do it for in exchange for zero-day vulnerabilities, like trading baseball cards. There's different ways that they can get into an environment and share that with parties that you don't want that to be shared with. Now, with that said, now the NetScaler engineer is now looking at all these things and is looking, wow, this is a lot of information I have to take in. And the reality is, yes, it's a lot of information coming in. And the reason why this guy's brain is like kind of on fire is because he's almost about to suffer from a brain aneurysm, because there's just a ton of information that you have to be on the watch for. Now, OTP MFA doesn't automatically mean external facing. Now, how many here can actually list every application in their environment? And then, can you tell me if they're all up to date? Now, the latest CVEs from Internet Explorer, for example, has 873 vulnerabilities. Can you, with 100% certainty, tell me that application is up to date? There are air gaps that are designed for like critical systems. It's a traditional approach to isolating very critical environments from the internet or other parts of the organization, things for industrial control, SCADA systems, and so on. My belief is that air gaps are pretty much dead at this point. As Kurt was saying, IoT, industrial IoT, these things are very big, and systems are more complex and connected. There's really no way to maintain the traditional air gaps. So the true approach to really correct this situation is segmentation and traffic control, right? And that's how you get to that defense in depth strategy. But the thing is, you have to consider the user experience or it's all destined to fail. Now, what's the best way to do this? Well, my opinion is you funnel and protect these pathways, these critical internal systems using choke points. And you put NetScalers in these choke points and you use MFA and OTP for access control. Now, I know there's a lot of people on this webinar that may not have experience with control systems and so on. So I thought, you know what, it's a global audience. Let me do some research, and the best thing I could find was actually this: critical maritime trade choke points. So if you look at a map of the Earth, when we need to get oil or other trade goods, the ships have to go through canals and straits. And really, there's only 6 of them that are really critical. And these critical checkpoints choke points are highly secure, highly monitored for this reason. So when we're talking about going from one environment to another, you should have choke points similar to this. Now, use cases for NetScaler Native OTP. These are just a few examples. These are not all of them. It's not an exhaustive list, but just a few use cases to get you thinking. So obviously, if you don't have an MFA solution, dropping Native OTP in there is going to give you better security pretty much overnight. The second use case would be moving away from a legacy MFA solution like hard tokens, for example, for a better user experience. Another use case would be using Native OTP in conjunction with an existing MFA in your environment for certain groups of users. So example, what if you said everybody in the main office gets existing MFA, but everyone in the branch office gets Native OTP? This saves a ton of money, right? Or you could say, high value accounts, like, C-level execs and so on, or, IT admins or whatever. Let's say they get existing MFA, but then they also get Native OTP chained on that through nFactor when the NetScaler detects their IP to be coming out from out of the country or even out of the state, whatever it is that you're looking for. Another use case is that internal networks without access to internet may not be able to use MFA solutions that are cloud-based services, that rely on cloud-based services. Some of the ones that I mentioned earlier have that limitation. They are dependent on the cloud. Well, Native OTP is actually fully 100% self-contained. So for those really isolated environments, this is a great solution. Now, getting into how to deploy Native OTP. OTP actually uses a management portal, a self-service portal. It looks just like a NetScaler Gateway or Unified Gateway login. You log into it, and the next thing you see is this screen where it says no registered devices. This is what your end user would actually see. And so the end user would click on add device, and then they would have to type in the name of their device. In my case, I decided to type in the word iPhone because I have an iPhone. Now, just keep in mind though, if you type in iPhone for your personal iPhone and then you later want to add another device and it happens to be a company iPhone and you say, you call it iPhone, well, it doesn't actually add 2 iPhones in there. It'll actually update the existing. So make sure that each name you give is unique. You have to train your users to do that. Once that's done, you get this little QR code here, right? And then you just tell the end user to scan this QR code with their authenticator app. So for me, this is a screenshot of me scanning my my app. It's very hard to take a screenshot on an iPhone while you're trying to scan something in, but QR codes are pretty resilient and it's still scanned just fine. And this is how it looks in the app. So here is Google Authenticator. Notice that I was able to scan it as many times as I wanted. And also notice in the top left-hand side, my phone is actually in airplane mode. It's not connected to the internet at all. So I just wanted to demonstrate that there's zero dependency on the internet. It's purely scanning that QR code, and the OTP, time-based OTP, gets dropped into the app. I also decided to test it with Microsoft Authenticator. Now, Microsoft Authenticator dropped it in there just as easily, but I was not able to continually scan and add multiple ones in there. They built some intelligence in there to see that it's the same one, and they only allowed me to put it in there once. So good on them for that. That's actually really cool. But again, it worked in airplane mode just fine. But I didn't stop there. I decided to keep continuing because you know, when I deploy something, I also want to try and break it and see what the limitations are. So I tried one of my other favorite MFA solutions, Okta. I used their Okta Verify app. I put that in airplane mode and I scanned that as well, and it allowed me to add it in there several times. Then I also tried Authy, which is another popular one. This allowed me to do multiple scans as well, and it worked just fine. So from there, I decided, you know what, let me see what else I have on my phone. And so I had the RSA Secure ID token app, and just for grins, I tried to scan that in. And unfortunately, the token import failed, invalid QR code. Well, that's okay, because the Secure ID token app is not meant for a time-based OTP. They actually have a different app for that. And I had it on my phone, RSA Secure ID Authenticate app, but unfortunately I couldn't test because when I was last deploying the solution, I never registered it with the And so I had to go to the Apple App Store, and I found the app again, and I went down, scrolled down, and sure enough, your company must be an RSA Secure ID access customer in order to use the app. And so I wasn't able to test this. But if you do use this app in your environment, when you get the recording of this video, feel free to go to that screen where I showed my QR code, try and scan it, see if it drops it in there. If it does, then you know this app works. The reason why I put an emphasis on the ability to use different authenticator apps is because you may not want to tell your users, hey, you know, you've been using one app this whole time, go download this other app, or you have to worry about pushing it to them. You can actually use the same app, and so the user experience kind of stays the same for them. So that is an option there. Now, continuing with the deployment of Native OTP, once you scan that QR code, it'll say that the iPhone has been added successfully, and then it's time to test. So when you hit the test button, it's going to show up the little one-time password field where you type in your passcode, and once you put it in there and hit go, it's going to successfully verify it. Now, using OTP on your unified gateway or NetScaler Gateway can be done in a number of ways, using login schemas and nFactor. The most common way, of course, is to just add a passcode field right there on the first login page. I have some companies where they've wanted username and password first, and then they want the passcode on the next screen. So there are ways to chain it together and put it anywhere you want using the power of nFactor. Now, you might be asking, so if it's just NetScaler, there's no backend servers or anything, it talks directly to AD, where does the key get stored? Well, it actually gets stored in the AD user account. When you go into ADUC and make sure it's in advanced mode and you go to attribute editor, you can pick from any of these attributes within your Active Directory to store this key. I chose to use other mobile, and you set this on your NetScaler and it just drops it in there. When you add multiple devices, you don't need multiple AD attributes. It actually just keeps appending the string value there. And each string, as you can see, is just the name of the device, in my case, iPhone, and then that code that you scanned earlier. And you can see that at the end of it says end and then a comma sign. Well, after that comma sign, the next one will be added there and the next one and so on. So if you add 5 devices, it'll be a very long string for you there. Note, because of this, the LDAP bind service account will need write access in order to be able to put that secret key in there. If it doesn't, when a user hits go after typing in that mobile device name during that registration phase, nothing will happen. No QR code will actually show up for them to scan, and you'll be kind of banging your head against the table. What's going on here? Well, the problem is that service account doesn't have the rights. So you have to go into ADUC, use the delegate control wizard, and then give it rights to do this. And you can be pretty granular there. I just gave it the create, delete, manage user accounts on the OU that my users were in. Now, how to deploy Native OTP, the 9 steps. The NetScaler config is really just very, very easy. It's setting up nFactor with Unified Gateway and using these new Native OTP login schemas that came with that firmware. Now, there's a bunch of bullets here, and really, I don't expect you to kind of run through all of them. It's like it's really 9 steps that'll take you around 10 minutes or so to deploy. But if you've never deployed nFactor and Unified Gateway, it sounds like just a big whiteboard full of chicken scratch to you. Don't worry about that. I'm going to give you some resources at the end, because I only have 30 minutes here to talk. But I'm going to give you some resources here at the end that'll break it down step by step. And in reality, these 9 steps really only take about 10 minutes to do. It's not hard at all once you have a little guidance on how to do it. Now, make sure the NTP is syncing on your NetScaler. I want to give you some tips now that you may run into, and it's more around troubleshooting more so than deployment, because I feel like I can save you a lot of time by telling you this. TOTP means a countdown, so it's clock dependent. So not only does your phone have to be in sync with the mobile provider, which it always pretty much is, but the NetScaler has to be in sync. There is some allowance for clock skew, but not a whole lot. So make sure your NTP is actually syncing on your NetScalers. Check the var log ntpd.log to help troubleshoot any type of time issues you have. The other thing is about nFactor support and the clients that you use. Native OTP is built on the back of nFactor, right? So nFactor is supported on web browsers, both desktop and mobile, but nFactor is not supported with native receivers at the moment. And your next question is going to be, well, why? Well, there's a really good explanation here. It was updated about 2 weeks ago. There's a CTX article right there. If you go read that, it'll kind of explain why that's like that. And hopefully we'll get some better news, but just keep on that CTX article to hear the latest updates on that. Now, anytime you set up and deploy something, I always say you have to have some kind of plan for logging and alerting on it, right? So good news, OTP, you can pull stats. The NetScaler team actually added counters into it, 4 different counters. So you just use NSCon message and you look for these counters, and it'll tell you the verification success fail and the manage success fail. So the 2 different types of ways that you're going to be authenticating. There's also authentication success messages in the AAA log, authentication success and failures, of course. So that's another way. So if you're using like a SIM, or you're doing like syslogging or something like that, you can manage and alert looking for these things. Now, the last thing that I want to get to is don't just deploy it. Make sure that that NetScaler Native OTP is actually successful in your environment. And these are some tips that actually are not just NetScaler specific or OTP specific. This is for really any project that's going to be end user facing. So with Citrix, pretty much every Citrix project you do. The key thing is educate. You have to have a user training plan. Put a usage video out there under 2 minutes, because it's hard to keep people's attention for very long. Have a user guide, PDF, or a URL out there that people can go and reference, and make sure your service desk is up to speed with everything you're doing, because users don't want to have to deal with escalations. They want that one-time call if there is an issue and the service desk is able to fix it. The other way to educate is email campaigns, just to tell people, hey, this is coming, this is the process. And the last thing is to socialize it. Have somebody that's in charge of your internet put a blog post up there on the internet on the homepage. Put elevator signs in there. You have a captive audience as they move up and down. And then, of course, lobby posters, having an easel out there with a nice big poster that's showing, hey, this is coming. And really, really, really just educate around this. Now, more resources from the community. George Spears wrote an excellent step-by-step guide. That's the link. He's a Citrix CTA. Citrix CTP Carl Stahlhood has, of course, impeccable documentation as always. He's got a great link there for OTP. Citrix team has released a 5-minute YouTube video showing it being deployed. There's also an OTP guide at that CTX right there, 228454. There's also the eDocs documentation. And lastly, there's a 14-page OTP deployment guide directly from Citrix. It's a nice little PDF that you can read through that shows its deployment. So in summary, I've shown you that NetScaler 12.0 build 5124 and above offers you native OTP functionality. It's free for enterprise and Platinum Edition NetScalers. No infrastructure is required. It's quick to set up. Works with existing MFA solutions you may own using nFactor. And above all, hackers are coming, and work to keep those ICE zombies out. So with that, thank you for listening to me, and I will pass it back to Stephanie.
Thank you, Jason. That was great. We had a few questions come in, so what I'd like to do is send those over to you, and maybe you can type up a few answers for us, and we'll post them out on mycugc.org.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. All right, we'll do that, and we'll get you guys the link to the form thread that we put those in when we send out the recording. And are you sharing your slide, Jason?
Yes, absolutely. I can upload them for you.
Great. Yeah, we had a couple requests for those too. All right, thank you so much. Okay, so we have another short little break. I hope that you guys will stick around. Up next, we have Remco Wanyan, and he is going to talk about security for Citrix admins and consultants. So we will be back in just a few minutes at about 1:40.